Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years. Pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. This week on the podcast, I have the final interview in my yoga teacher training series. A really amazing chat with none other than Leslie Pearlman. Now, Leslie runs Good Ground Yoga, and she's an expert yoga teacher trainer. Her business revolves around training new yoga teachers and up-leveling the teachers that are already around. And she gives us some insights on her methodology and best practices in this podcast. And at the end, she shares what I think is one of the smartest business models for teacher training that I have ever heard. I'm not even kidding you all. Like, seriously, there isn't a lot that impresses me business-wise anymore in this industry, but this model absolutely did. But first, this is the part of the podcast where I remind you to like, follow, or share the podcast from wherever you're listening. There are like 99 reasons for this, but this week, can I just ask you to do me a solid and like, follow, and share? That would be really great. Thank you. And don't forget to check out www.midwestyogaconference.com if you want to come and join me and other podcast guests in Des Moines, Iowa on October 26th, 2024. The Midwest Yoga Conference is our sponsor for this series in the podcast, and honestly, we just love them. Now, I honestly do not want you to wait any longer. Let's get into my talk with Leslie Pearlman. Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Okay, I have Leslie Pearlman on the podcast this week, and Leslie, her gig is yoga teacher training programs, and I am so excited to talk to her about it. So Leslie, tell me who you are and what you do.
Okay. Well, first, I want to thank you so much for having me here. I've been a yoga teacher, full-time yoga teacher for since 2000. So what is that? 24 years now. Before that, I used to be an attorney, and I was suffering and struggling. I ran a domestic violence advocacy project, and I don't know if anyone can understand, like I felt really excited about the work that I was doing and helping people. And at the same time, there was like a little tiny feeling inside of me that I was just kind of dying inside. And I used to dream about teaching yoga. I did yoga as a kid, and did a teacher training and thought, this is really what I want to do with my life. And so since then, I've been teaching yoga. I have a yoga studio called Good Ground Yoga. I live on the eastern end of Long Island, and my mission for the last 2 decades really has been training and mentoring yoga teachers and growing teachers that are really skilled and who want to make a difference in the world. And that's been my focus now in my studio and also online. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, 'cause I feel like yoga teacher training is actually like the conversation we should be having. How we train people, the integrity with which we train people. I mean, like we're setting the standard for the industry. And so I really want to talk about a couple things. Okay, so you run training programs. Like, why did you start training yoga teachers?
Oh, it's
why do you think people train?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons why people do it. I think there are some myths, and maybe we can debunk some of the myths a little bit here. I think some people think that a teacher training is like a big cash cow, and it's a way to be very profitable in the business, which there's some truth to that. I think some people start running a teacher training because they feel like they're on a mission, which is a little bit more about the reason why I started doing a teacher training. I felt a desire to raise the standard of teachers in our industry and a commitment to professionalism, and also correcting things that I saw that were potential risks and harmful things that I was seeing in the industry as well. And also, I think a lot of people, start a teacher training because they want to have a high caliber staff of teachers in their studio. And so many people that I know who are studio owners really struggle with finding great yoga teachers. So they wind up running their own teacher training because they want teachers that are talented and skilled and thoughtful and compassionate, and also teachers that are kind of on brand with their mission. That often is hard to find. So, I have to be honest, when I started a teacher training, I guess my first teacher training was, I think the first teacher training that I ran of my own, I used to be a forest yoga guardian and mentor teacher. So I apprenticed with Anna Forrest and was one of her trainers for her programs. But my own teacher training, I think the first one I did was 2012, maybe. And, I really did that because I didn't have good teachers. And I wanted good teachers for my studio, and I wanted teachers that I trusted. And so that's really where my first teacher training started from, was that reason, more so than, like to make money or even to think about being a service to the industry. It was mostly selfishly motivated.
I think honestly, so many studios have training programs for that exact reason. And in fact, you and I met through a particular Facebook group with yoga studio owners. I asked this question last year. Like, I was just like, hey, tell me why you train people even to begin with. And I'd been going back and forth about whether or not I was going to train. And I would say 50 to 60% of those comments were, I don't have teachers who teach in the way I need them to teach. In my own community, we have our biggest training programs are primarily Ashtanga and Vinyasa. I don't run an Ashtanga and Vinyasa studio, so I either am relying on teachers to go get outside training, or they're coming into the studio and I'm just coaching them until they can come on brand with me. So I totally get that. Like, I think that's a primary motivator.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's really important because, as a studio owner, studios have a mission. I look at your mission, it's very clear and obvious, like who you serve and what you believe in. And if you have teachers that are trained in a different way and they're incongruent with your mission, that's a problem. And especially, when your mission is a healing mission, which is like my teacher trainings, that's one of the primary focuses. You want to know that your teachers are adept at modifying and creating inclusive container and, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's really important, and a need. But there's lots of other reasons why people might do a teacher training as well. I think people, there are some people that really feel like they have a talent, a real talent for leading teacher trainings. It's very interesting because I think a lot of people do run a teacher training program for that reason or others. And being a great yoga teacher doesn't mean you're a great yoga teacher trainer, right?
Yes.
Ding, ding,
Yes.
ding. And that's very true. And so I spend a lot of time mentoring and working in a consulting fashion for people who want to run teacher training programs, who have great ideas, but they don't actually know how to lead. And, and that's one of the biggest, I think, challenges in growing an extraordinary teacher training program. You can love yoga and be great at practicing yoga and know a lot about yoga, but leading people through a teacher training, helping them, recognize where they're blocked and where they need to grow, et cetera, that's a whole different skill set.
Okay, so tell me this, like, when we talk about yoga teacher trainings are the problem, I mean, I would say that's an industry, like I'm sure you've heard that dialogue in the past of like, we're like churning out yoga teachers faster than we have an industry that's growing. I mean, in spite of the fact we're worth billions, but whatever. Whatever. That's exactly fine. Like, why do you think we have that dialogue around us? Like, I don't know if I buy it or agree with it. And I'm curious as to why you think we even talk that way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like shame, shame, shame on us sometimes. Like, I don't know, meaning like I think sometimes we're so disparaging in our own industry around other
Yes.
people. So I think there's like a whole conversation to have about that. Do I know that that's very true, that we're just cranking out teachers? Maybe. I don't really know. I do think that there was a time, I think things might be changing a little bit, but I do think that there was a time where, there were a lot of teacher training programs and like our industry was growing very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And so I think people were kind of jumping on the bandwagon. I also think now things have changed. I mean, COVID's really changed things a lot too. And what I'm seeing is that there's all kinds of teacher trainings out there. Some of them are very in-depth, some of them are very personal with a lot of in-person or live interactive. There are a lot of trainings now where you can do them fully remote. There's all different price points and all different commitment levels. So I wouldn't say that all teacher trainings are the same. I mean, I'll be perfectly frank about that.
Of
I'm not
course.
here to like disparage somebody's teacher training or say that this is right or this is wrong, but everything isn't created equal. So I think that it's important for people to feel proud about the kind of trainings and the quality of the trainings that they're developing. But I do think that in some ways we are producing a lot of teachers. But I think also that our industry is changing too. I mean, there was a time when, people were trained to be yoga teachers and they were really just like teaching for a yoga studio. And now there are so many more
Yeah.
opportunities about what to do with your education. I think so many people are taking teacher trainings also not because they want to be yoga teachers, but because they want to grow as humans and they want to learn about themselves or they want to learn about this practice. They want to have better relationships with people or better relationships with themselves. And I think that that's a wonderful thing. And I also think that yoga teacher training, I know I'm getting off topic a little bit, but I also think like a yoga teacher training is first and foremost a teacher training to really help people um, be the space holders for a safe class for people.
Yep.
And sometimes I think there's a little bit of a blend of what they are. And while I think that great yoga teacher trainings are inner work as much as like how to teach a class, that the quality of teacher trainings vary depending on like what the primary focus of that teacher training is. But, it's wonderful. Yoga teachers, when you graduate a yoga teacher training, you have all these wonderful skills that apply to all kinds of walks of life. And
Ooh,
right? I mean,
yeah. Yeah.
you're not just limited to teaching in a studio or teaching a class at a gym, for instance. You can weave that into all different areas. And, yoga teachers are using these skills in different ways. That's why I think like it's great that there are lots of teacher training programs. The world needs more people who know about yoga.
Ooh, so you've said something I really like about that too, is that the things that we can learn within teacher training programs are transferable skills. They can be used in a whole lot of ways, like how to command attention in a room, how to control, like, I mean, if you're in a board meeting and nobody ever taught you how to run a board meeting, running a meeting is very similar to running a yoga class. That's a transferable skill.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so interesting because, I mean, everyone runs their teacher trainings very differently, but one of the things that we spend a lot of time in my teacher trainings is talking about our voice and being able to be a space holder, to be able to take up space, to feel comfortable and confident in your own skin, to know how to communicate effectively and to use your body as a form of communication. And also to understand about particular patterns and habits, right? Because who you habitually are isn't necessarily who you actually are. And what's wonderful about a teacher training is you get to really look at your patterns and your habits, especially around communication, right? And what I love about teacher trainings, I mean, some of the things that I spend a lot of time on with my trainees or in supporting other studios to build teacher training programs is to look at what you've consented to and what you haven't consented to, especially for, right? You love it.
Yes.
as like, as
I'm
a
like,
student.
woo!
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But also, like, I think also I'm talking like as for women in particular about like, how we've been agreeable, or how we may ask for permission, or how we may be
Yes.
quiet, or we may, feel nervous about interrupting, all of that stuff. So when you actually learn to stand in front of a room and speak and own your voice and own your authority, it's so transformative, and that is
Yeah.
going to play a role in every relationship, whether it's a professional relationship or a personal relationship, or how you parent your children, or you parent your animals, or whatever it is. It is transferable, as you said. I really love that idea of this being a transferable skill, and that's why I think that teacher trainings are so important. But teacher trainings must also be about this stuff too, because you can't be a great yoga
Yes.
teacher if you can't be a great human and really feel one, embodied, and also feel empowered. And
Yeah.
that's important.
I think that's all part of. So throughout this series, almost every single guest that's been on this series, we talked about pedagogy, essentially how to teach somebody something. And it's like these are all skills that you just need to be able to teach. You could teach yoga, you could teach basket weaving, you could teach how to bake a pie, you could teach how to, start an Instagram account. Like this is just how you teach people a thing. That
Mhm.
requires you to get their buy-in, it requires you to get their consent and to command their attention, and they respect your authority. And but like that's part of all of this. And while yoga is important, if you're training teachers, you have to train them how to teach too. do you,
Exactly.
do you see that as something that we're missing within teacher training culture?
Absolutely. Because I feel
Yeah.
like, I mean, I'm speaking generally, but I feel
Yeah.
like in general, very often a teacher training is focused on, as it should be, but focused on like the asanas, or focused on the philosophy, or focused on, anatomy. And while all of those things are extremely important, what's missing, the missing link then is what it means to step into leadership, because that is really
Yes.
what you're learning how to do. I just had a conversation with someone. I'm helping them develop a teacher training program. And I asked her, what is her methodology? What is her teaching methodology? And she didn't know how to answer that question. And that was like missing. She's been running teacher trainings for years, but she doesn't have a sense of what her teaching methodology is, meaning your methodology as you teach as a teacher, and your methodology for training other teachers. And that
Yep.
it was missing in her training. And, the methodology is essential, as you were talking about,
Yeah.
because, for instance, like my methodology is to help my teachers, right? When they step into the seat of the yoga teacher, they have to notice what's happening. They have to feel, that's step two, feel what's happening in order to trust themselves to make a decision. Then they have to dig deep and be in the uncomfortable, because teaching and leadership is uncomfortable. And then in that uncomfortable moment, they have to then step forward as like discern, like what is a healing aligned action? Like, what can you ask a student to do that is a good choice or not? And then they have to do something. They have to take action, which is number five. They have to actually, based on all that information that they're processing and feeling in their body, give their students something to do or something not to do, or a choice, or et cetera. And so it's so essential. I feel like the methodology of how we teach is missing from all of the teacher training programs,
Yes.
right? And what the purpose, the point of it all. What I love about like teaching yoga in a teacher training is that the teacher training is the vehicle for the transformation,
Yeah.
right? Just like anything, like knitting. Knitting could be the vehicle for the transformation. You could knit and
Yes.
you're a different person when you finish knitting, right? And that's the same process about teacher trainings. However, if you're running a teacher training without awareness of what the transformation is that you're after, and how to help people get from point A to point B, then there's a breakdown in the teacher training. And that's where you
Yeah.
start getting teachers that may be able to regurgitate a script and not really know how to modify or make choices, embodied choices, or help their students become empowered to choose for themselves what's good and what's not good. It's because that was missing from their training.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite thing about the list that you made of like, this is my methodology, this is how I train teachers, was that you're asking them to check in with themselves first.
Hmm.
Because, like, and that's something that's often a conversation we're having in like trauma informed spaces too,
Yeah.
is yo, you can't be a hot mess coming in, like,
Yeah.
5 minutes late, not wearing shoes. And that's literally happened in my studio once. I mean, the once.
You mean the teacher
like,
showed up that way?
yeah, the teacher
Yeah.
showed up that way and it was like, hot mess express kind of. And I was like, yeah, but I need you to be together with yourself first before you come in there, because we have a responsibility to the people in the room.
100% agree. But
I
I mean,
think,
imagine if a teacher didn't know that, right? I mean, if they weren't
yeah,
trained to do that.
I think oftentimes we think of that responsibility to start and end with the asana too. Like, our responsibility to our students is to make sure, they don't twitch their shoulder wrong or they don't put their foot in a way that makes their ankle hurt. But there's so much more to that, I think, than just that movement safety that we've been preaching about since like 2016 or something,
Of
when we all got
course.
excited.
Of course. No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, one of the things I spend a lot of time on, and I think these are breakdowns in trainings, is who are you being as the yoga teacher, as the space
Yeah.
holder, as the leader, right now? And and there we could have a whole conversation about like what your role is as a teacher. Like, are you a guide? Are you telling people what to do? I mean, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and, before you walk into a space, you have to check yourself, right? You really have to
Yeah.
ask yourself, like, what intention am I bringing into this space and how am I showing up and what am I responsible for and what am I not responsible for? And, so it's essential to learn and to train your teaching team or your trainees how to do that very important work, right? To clear their energy, to clear their space, to think about, who they are, and to also like who they are. Not every day,
Yeah.
it's not rainbows and unicorns, right? But to meaning like to be in a place of acceptance about where you are, to be honest, to practice and teach from a place of integrity, and to teach authentically, which means, you're not treating the yoga mat as a dumping ground for your stuff, but you're aware
Let's
of
not do that anymore. Can we?
that.
Can we not do
Exactly.
that anymore, please?
Exactly. I do not need to hear about that. However,
No.
right, but we do have to get real about where we are and what happened yesterday or what happened last week, and how am I going to be able to show
Yeah.
up and lead given all of that. So, that is, I think, a key critical part of teacher training programs. And we have a responsibility to help our trainees and future teachers do that really well.
Do you have a technique? And this is, you've probably seen these posts too, even within the studio owner space. Do you have a technique for like how people can check in with themselves about whether or not they should be leading a class? Because I'm
Yeah.
thinking of a couple things in particular where people have been like, oh, I went through this thing and we were all crying together. And like, should I do that? And babe, no, you should. No, you
Oh,
shouldn't.
you mean like them like being the space holder or leading a class
As
and
the
going along
teacher.
with the class?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
How do you check in?
I use a couple of tools. These are tools that I teach my students to do in class as well. They're what I think of them as basic moves. And a lot of these basic moves are basic moves that I learned from Forest Yoga, which is getting your feet active, meaning using like pushing your feet into the floor, lifting and spreading your toes, and getting your feet very active and grounding yourself so you feel where the heck you are. Because very often you're like in your thoughts, or you're in your trauma, or you're in your worry, or your nervous system is so dysregulated, it's hard to like get present. So the first step is like get your feet active and start to breathe very deeply, and feel yourself breathe at least like 10 very deep breaths. And if you have difficulty staying present for 10 breaths with your feet active, then that is an indicator that you can't hold space for other people. It's very, very simple. And then to like really like check in to find the place in your body that's, I think of it as like it's like the litmus test. It's the place in your body that is your little lie detector. And this takes time to develop. And in my teacher trainings, and when I'm helping people develop teacher trainings, this is part of the training to learn how to do this. is to feel like, where in my body do I check in to know, like, am I okay? Am I not okay? What is it telling me? So it could be someone's gut, belly, it could be someone's, it could be somewhere up here, it could be your heart, it could be someplace. And to put your hands onto that part of your body, check in and feel like, what information are you getting there? So those would be the things that I would recommend that people learn how to do or practice how to do before they're teaching, to get honest whether they can do this thing or not do this thing.
Yeah, I think that's such an important conversation for us to have, is that if life's going awry, which life says sometimes, and it does go awry, like those internal conversations about, is this an appropriate time for me to show up for my students? That's part of our job. I want to circle back to one of the things you said earlier, this idea of what kind of teacher you are, a guide or something else. I want to talk about that just briefly, because I feel like people love to throw out, like, I'm a yoga teacher guide, or I'm a yoga facilitator, I'm a yoga educator. We have like 1,000 words for teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you find that to be important that we have that language, or is it just 1,000 ways to say teacher?
No, I actually think it's a really important conversation, and I think it's essential in training teachers to have a conversation about, like, what is your responsibility and what's not your responsibility.
Yeah.
One of the hallmarks of teachers that I train, it's the 8th hallmark, is a yoga classroom that's free of unhealthy codependency.
Woo!
There you go.
Yes. Hello.
Right? Hello.
She said the thing.
I did say the thing. I mean, that's actually a hallmark of someone that's trained by me, or, what I really believe in as part of my mission, because I do believe that our yoga space is ripe, or potentially ripe, for like teachers, like basically like hand holding everybody and telling them what to do. And other people and students becoming entirely dependent on us, and kind of bypassing the challenge, the opportunity to learn how to make good, healthy decisions for themselves. So that's a big conversation. And with that said, I also believe that there has to be a conversation about who's doing what amount. So there are times in a classroom where I think there's like a 50-50 exchange, where the teacher might be doing 50% of the work and the student might be doing 50% of the work. For instance, let's say you're demonstrating something. You're going to do a twisting lunge. And so you tell everyone, just watch me, and you demonstrate what we're doing, and you show it. And then you turn to your students, you say, okay, now it's your turn. So I would think of that as like a 50-50 exchange, where I'm showing and now I'm turning it to the students, and they're then doing it themselves. And there are also times where the teacher might be doing more than just 50-50. With permission, and like all of those conversations as well. And then there are other times where, like, the space is really free, where you're just making suggestions, and here are all these choices, and like, it's up to you, choose what you want to do. Depending also on like the population and the kind of class, you might err on the side of more choice and agency, and other places where this teacher is really guiding. But one of the things that I think is very important too is, like, for instance, I encourage all of my teachers that I train to say the pose name first. And the reason why I love this strategy is it puts your student on notice. So there's nothing, there's no surprises, because our nervous system wants to know. And it also allows for people who know what it is that you're saying, they can go ahead and do it any old way they want to. And then for those who don't really know, they can listen more or observe more, and then they have your helping them. And the reason why I mention this is, there's all different kinds of students in the class. And the pose name first helps to heal the unhealthy codependency of, like, for instance, like a vinyasa flow class. And I'm not disparaging the vinyasa flow, but where they're cueing, inhale, step your left foot forward, reach your right arm up, and they're kind of cueing every tiny little step to get to something where a student doesn't know where they're going.
Yeah.
Right. And so it means they're dependent on you for every single cue, every movement. And so in that example, the teacher is like really like leading every single aspect, and there's no space for the student to have choice and opportunity to learn on their own. And I do believe that we have to have a combo of all of those things. There's,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
go ahead.
agree with you. I mean, I love how you've said that, like eliminating unhealthy codependency from classes, because wow, are we just full of all of that? And I talk about this a lot too with when I'm training people and within my studio. I feel like this is a constant conversation of it is a very natural human response to get really excited about that sort of codependency. When people are looking at you and they're saying, "Oh my gosh, you're amazing and you've helped me do this thing and it's changed my life," and like, I'll hang on your every word. Like,
Mhm.
if that doesn't terrify you as a teacher, we need to talk, because that should like
Exactly.
we have to hand that back, because there is that sort of unhealthy codependency kind of situation that happens, right? Which,
Yes,
on
and
a
also,
massive scale, you could
of
Bikram.
course, so like there's all that hero worship, and it's very
Yeah,
enticing. I mean, our
of
ego
course.
loves it, right?
Yeah.
I'll be perfectly frank. Like I have to check in a lot. I'm sure you do as well.
Yes. Yes.
Right? And so that's why, it's, I think when we're training teachers who are going to step into the seat of authority, because there is an unhealthy or a potentially unhealthy power dynamic, or like a dynamic in the classroom, the teacher, the student, we really have to check ourselves. But at the same time, I also think it's important to recognize that, like, as a yoga teachers, we do have a degree of expertise, right?
Yeah.
People are coming to our classes because we've studied and we've trained and we've learned things, and now we're sharing what we've learned so people can make good decisions. But it's very important, I think, to understand that the student is the ultimate decider of what works and what doesn't work. And it's not enough. And this is, I think, where there's a breakdown in some teacher trainings. It's not enough to just tell the class, like, choose what feels good for you. I trust you to do whatever you want,
Yes.
because they don't know, maybe they've
Yes.
lived their whole life making certain kinds of decisions to keep them safe that are actually damaging their body or damaging
Yeah.
their spirit. And so, and it's not that you're going to tell them how to do it, but you're going to actually give them an opportunity to practice making healing decisions, which takes time. But
Yeah.
we have to train our teachers to know how to give students the skills, the tools, the resources to
Yes.
make those decisions, right?
I feel like we get lazy about it. It is that phrase that just drives me crazy, is when people say over and over again in teacher class, in yoga classes, "Listen to your body."
Yeah.
I had a teacher or a student say to me one time, she looked me dead in the face. And this was early. I've been teaching about the same amount of time you have, about 25 years.
Yeah.
And this was maybe 10 years in. She looks at me in the face. She goes, "My body told me to eat cake for breakfast." And I was like, I'll never forget it. Number one, because I love cake. So I was like, well, honestly, like,
Sounds
fair,
good.
fair. But there is, like, how we can say that to a group of students when we haven't taught them what agency is and what pedagogy or proprioception is and what we're
Yeah,
feeling on the inside and all these things. Like, we've not given them the tools
of
to
course.
actually make a skillful
Of
decision.
course, of course. And our body and what our body is telling us is unreliable often.
Yes, yes,
Right?
it is.
Right. So like I always think sometimes like, oh, my body's telling, well, it's a little trickster sometimes. And so, right. So that is one of my pet peeves too. And I mentor so many yoga teachers, and they'll often do that. And it comes from a very good intention place.
Yes.
But like we're saying, you're abandoning your student. It's a setup for failure if you just give the caveat, listen to your body, without saying, I'm going to teach you
Yes.
how to listen to your body, and I'm going to trust you to make a wise decision. And you'll mess up, and that's part of the process. We're all going to mess up, and we're all going to think that it's like helpful, and then we modify and adapt, because that's part of the healing process. It's not forward facing, it's forward and back, up and down forever. And we have to help. This is the idea of creating like agency, choice, and feeling empowered and feeling comfortable, learning how to trust yourself. But we live in a culture where we're not taught how to do that ever.
Yes.
So to expect a student to walk into a yoga room and listen to their body is absurd, really.
And those aren't discussions we're having in training programs, which
Definitely.
really
Yeah.
we have to be having those. Also, can I just say I don't know how we haven't been friends before this moment, but like I love you.
I feel the same way. I feel like we're
Like
talking the same language.
yes.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to bring up something you've said a couple different times, and I want to combine it with this thing that I've been thinking about within the industry in our head. You talked a lot about mentorship, which is, I think, a glaring thing that we're missing within the industry is that people graduate 200 hours and then there's like nothing. Then they're just high five and they're off into the world. So I want to talk about mentoring, and I want to talk about the loneliness that we experience as yoga teachers because we have nowhere to really connect unless you're within a studio space, but you're still working alone,
Yeah.
typically. Like, can we talk about let's talk about mentorship first.
Yeah. Do you have a specific question about mentorship or
No,
just?
I want to hear what you had to say about mentorship,
Oh, well, I mean, it's
honestly.
funny because when I never really thought about mentorship. In a way, I'm very grateful because I fell into mentorship for myself. Because when I did my teacher training, I did a first teacher training in 2000 at Shivananda. I was teaching actually yoga before that. And I mean, I shouldn't have been because I wasn't
Same,
trained, but I was.
same.
Then I did a Shivananda training, and then I met my teacher Anna Forrest in 2002. And my whole life changed when I met her, meaning that like it opened my eyes to a whole way of looking at healing. And I apprenticed with her. It was kind of an unofficial, apprenticeship, but I apprenticed with her for about 10 years. So she really mentored me. I traveled with her, I assisted her, I did everything that I could to learn with her. And but it wasn't a formal, I mean, she has now codified it and created like a formal process of moving through like mentorship and then into, becoming like mentor teachers and guardian teachers and senior teachers and things like that. But, at the time, I kind of went through that as it was being developed. Then when I did my first teacher training, I realized that people graduated. My first teacher training class, I don't know, I had 25 people or something, and they all left, and that was it. And many of those teachers wanted to work for me. And I saw that even though the training was really powerful and effective, they needed more support. And so the mentorship just kind of grew because they wanted it. That's what
Yeah,
happened. We became
yeah.
very close, and they said, we want to continue to learn from you. So then I started creating a mentoring program. So all of my teacher trainings end, and then there's a mentorship where people can jump into afterwards. And I mentor, in like I do sometimes a 3-month mentoring container as a group or individually. Or I also do these, like I call them apprenticeship models, where it's like a 3-day deep dive immersion where people travel to my training center and they spend 3 days with me, which is like really, it's like a year in 3 days. It's very intense.
Yeah.
It's not for the faint of heart, let me tell you. But because the reason why mentorship matters is, one, you have to apply and practice what you've learned, right? So very often a teacher training doesn't have enough practice and integration time.
Yeah.
Very often, a lot of teacher trainings are just people telling you things, and then you teach, like, I don't know, maybe one class at the end, or maybe even
Yes.
half a class or a section of a class, and you have a written exam, and and you're really ill-equipped because you haven't had the practice of putting it into practice and integrating. So that's what I think mentorship is necessary for. I do believe that teacher training should have more integration and practice and actual real teaching. All of my teacher trainings, we start teaching on day one.
Same.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't care. You can
Same.
say anything. You could teach me how to stir a cup. It doesn't matter.
Yes.
You're teaching,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Exactly. So
Same.
mentorship is a way also, because what's wonderful about a mentor is we do not need to reinvent the wheel. And for you and me, who've been around for a long time, we have, I believe, a responsibility and a duty to help newer teachers feel comfortable and confident teaching. And so it's, and you can learn so quickly when you have mentorship. Some people might spend years learning what they could learn just by asking their mentor and applying it immediately. And,
Yeah.
we don't want to be like the gatekeepers and keep this all a secret, right? We want to
Yes.
share it with people so they get better. And so our whole industry changes and people feel good, right? So
Yeah.
that's what I believe that mentorship is really important for. And also mentorship is where you can personalize things. In my teacher trainings, at least in my 300-hour training, it ends with private mentorship. Everyone gets a month of like one-on-one time with me, because that's how they're going to grow. And mentorship, I also think, is twofold. It's one to address blocks and challenges and where people are struggling so they can get better and grow their skills. But mentorship is really about a person finding their gifts and having someone else see you, because often we can't see our gifts. We only can see what we're not doing well, but another person gets to see all of you. And mentorship is so you can talk about a person's gifts and strengths and talents and then grow their gifts. So that's required to grow wonderful teachers, is for teachers to feel like, I know what my gift is, and I'm gonna share this gift with the world.
I love that, especially ending a 300 like that, because I think at the end of a 200, people don't quite know where they want to go. For us to skip, they're just like, I want to do this and I'm very excited and I'm going to teach everybody. And that's sort of what I call it, the up leveling your skill set time. I'm like, you're just gonna you're gonna do this thing and you're gonna do it over and over again and you're gonna suck at it and you're gonna be like, I hated it, and you're just gonna do it until you can without thinking teach whatever whatever Leslie class would be,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
and then I think that's when I love the idea of people coming into more training and mentorship, really at that point. Like, now what? Like, now how do we build this into something that feeds you and nourishes you?
Exactly.
Yeah. Why aren't we all doing that?
I honestly don't know. And, and also as for a business model, I mean, let's talk frank, right? We're also talking about business, like, for a business model, it's actually part of your ascension model. And I think many studio owners aren't really thinking about an ascension model, but, you have people that come in and they start taking classes, and then those people may be interested in doing a teacher training, whether they want to teach or just grow their own practice. And then after that, like, where do they go? Well, they move into the next level of your ascension. They move into mentorship. And so then you help them grow their gifts. And then from there, maybe a 300-hour, or maybe it's a 300-hour and then it's a mentorship. In my ascension model, people will do the 300-hour and then they do apprenticeship with me, which is very different than that, right? So apprenticeship is like really like, like really taking the mentoring to the next level. And that's where I do those 3-day apprenticeships, or sometimes I do a month-long apprenticeship where people come and actually work with me at my training center and like run things and have me in their ear as they, step into that next level. And, it's really important to be able to do that. So many other industries have apprentices and have mentoring, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really smart for, like you said, so many reasons. One, like, if part of your mission as a person is to up level the skill set of the industry, like if you're looking to up level what we've got and you're not thinking in this fashion, please start. Start thinking this way. And if from a business perspective, it makes so much sense because, frankly, as we discussed earlier, teacher training isn't a cash cow either. And it ends.
It can be. I mean, it certainly can be profitable. I'm not saying it can't be profitable, because, I mean, to be honest, like, it is. I mean, it's a huge chunk of my business because that's my primary focus. But, there are many, many yoga studios, and I've helped a lot of yoga studios build like very profitable teacher trainings. But, it's not just motivated by like cranking out as many people as possible, right? I mean, I think that's the difference. I also think like there's, for whatever reason, many yoga studios, I think our industry has modeled a lot of what we do from the fitness industry, and that's not a good thing, right?
Yeah.
You had asked me another question. We were talking about mentorship, but then there was something else that you were asking.
I want to talk about our loneliness, like how we don't have coworkers. I mean, it's just because I think that what got me thinking about that is that sort of 8th principle there that you have of the codependency. And I'm like, that also feeds into it, of this codependency between teacher and student. When we ourselves are so lonely and don't have people to connect with who are also teachers, or in studio owners' cases, also studio owners, like, we get lonely. How do you combat that? What do you tell other people?
That's a great question. I didn't really make that connection until you just said that. So thank you. That's like, very powerful. That idea of like, the loneliness as kind of a contributor to
Yeah.
the need to feel like needed by our students. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things. I do feel, unfortunately, that the burden falls on the yoga teacher to create the community that they are so desperately lacking.
Yeah.
I do think some yoga studio owners are taking the initiative to do something about this, which is very important for creating the like I think like a community or a studio that feels like a community and like a family. So that would mean things like teacher practice or continued education for their teachers,
Yeah.
or I don't know, weekly potlucks or monthly get-togethers or things like that. I think that's very important. And I also believe that we should be continually inspiring one another through things like that. I do that a lot with, but like I said, very often there's not a lot of people who are taking the initiative in our industry to create opportunities for yoga teachers to feel like they're a part of something and continue to be
Yeah.
inspired, right? So we talk a lot in my teacher trainings about like, well, how we're done and how are you going to continue to stay inspired? What are ways to like keep you turned on and lit up? I personally do a lot where, my training center is both in person and online. So I have a lot of yoga teachers that actually are part of my online community. They practice. I have like regular classes where they practice with me. I teach on Zoom 6 days a week, and we all practice together. And then after class, we hang out on Zoom and talk about the class or talk about what's coming up. I have a very active Facebook group for people who are yoga teachers that are in any of my containers. And I mean, it's surprising how active that group is. People are sharing things or asking questions. I'm in there all the time. In my own training center, I have advanced practice. It doesn't necessarily mean hard, but it's really geared towards teachers, where we talk about different themes, or we might do round robin practice together, where we create a class together and just lead each other, or one person comes in with an idea and we build the class together, things like that. So I do think it's a responsibility for those of us that have yoga studios to do this for our teachers. And I also think like teachers have to seek it out. And thankfully, since there is so much online resources now, this is a new development. This is one of the benefits I think that came out of COVID is there are ways to be in community with people from all over the world. And that's one of the really
Yes.
exciting things about, my hybrid teaching training, um, um, like structure is that, there are people that are connected that would never be connected before. And so my training group has become so much more diverse because we're from all over the world, which is great.
I'm glad you brought up your hybrid training because I do think you're absolutely right. I was so lonely until the internet, right? Like, and then all of a sudden I was able to make friends with people from all over, and we could have conversations. And I was like, oh yay! Because I was hungry for these conversations. So hungry I made a podcast about it, but
Amazing.
like really hungry to talk with colleagues essentially.
Mhm.
Now, when we talk about how the hybrid model has come into yoga, at least I see it really being the way most of us are going to end up playing. Do you find that that's a different skill set that you're training your teachers on how to teach?
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay,
Definitely.
let's talk about
Totally
that.
different. Yeah. It's totally different. I mean, there is overlap for sure. And I think it depends on, what we're talking about. So I think there's kind of two skills, right? One skill is being a great yoga teacher and training yoga teachers to be able to teach in person and online or both. And then the other thing that I'm also spending a lot of energy is training like people who want to be teacher trainers to then run a program or a teacher training in a hybrid model or in an online model, right? So it's very different. Running a teacher training in person is different than running a hybrid teacher training, right? So for instance, my
Yes.
teacher trainings, and I have an even more interesting model. So basically what I do is I have my training center, and there are people that are there in person for my training. They can come to any of my live. I usually lead a training. It's one weekend a month live with an online component of like material that they can digest at their own time. and go back to and have that forever, which is a change because in the old days when it was all in person, they had like a manual. But now everything is recorded and you can watch it over and over because we learn by listening more than once. So people are in my studio. And then I also have people who are doing my training from all over the world. So they're on Zoom. So I have the big, Brady Bunch screen with, let's say, 20 people from all over the world. And then I also have a group of people here. And I also run affiliates. So that means that I have cohorts of yoga studios who want to be a part of my teacher training. They don't want to run the teacher training themselves. And they, as a group, take my teacher training. So in this particular training, my most recent training, I had a cohort in Juneau, Alaska. So I had 10 people who are doing that training from a studio in Juneau. They all met at the studio live. They watched me do the teacher training. And during our breakout sessions, when we practice things, they practice with each other in person. And there's a yoga studio owner who's an affiliate of mine, who's running that part live. They get trained by me how to do that. I'm leading the live people in my studio. And then the people who are all participating via Zoom, they're in individual breakout rooms. And then I'm managing those breakout rooms. That's a lot to do at once, right?
I love that so much, Leslie. That's fucking brilliant.
It is brilliant. So that's so I have like an affiliate,
good.
right? So people can be an affiliate of my
good.
Good Ground Yoga training. They don't have to risk, right? They don't have to spend 1,000 hours creating a teacher training program.
Yeah.
They don't have to, there's even no risk because basically anyone who enrolls, that studio gets an affiliate commission. They're getting paid basically by me to be a part of my teacher training. So I'm very selective as to like who comes in as an affiliate, because there has to be an alignment. But it's like a win-win for everyone. Plus, part of that model is I mentor the yoga studio owners who are acting as affiliates for me, and I help them become better leaders. And so in real time, they're learning how to lead the teacher training without having to take it on all at once. So that's so I'm doing that. And then I'm also training people to be great teachers in a hybrid model, because that is the way our industry will be. It's not enough to only be able to teach in person, I believe. I believe it's an important skill to know how to teach either only online, only in person, and a hybrid, which is really hard, because what you're doing is, at least the way I train people to teach, is they're actually talking to the people on Zoom. So they might be demonstrating a pose in the class. They have to position themselves so the people in the class can see and the Zoom people can see. And then when they're giving feedback and looking around the room, there's many different ways of teaching. So in a more trauma-informed class, this might not apply. So I'm not talking about a traditional trauma-informed model, but I am a trauma-inspired model. But they might be walking around the room or looking around and helping a person who needs help and assistance to modify. They might say, Mary, consider putting your knee down. That might take the pain off of your low back. But then they're also going to the Zoom screen at the same time and looking at their Zoom people and saying, Joanne, I see that your hip is like this. What happens if you move your hip this way? Does that help? So learning how to juggle your online classroom and your in-person classroom, that's a whole other kind of training.
That is a whole ball of wax, because I do occasionally teach that hybrid model where you're both online and in person, but I honestly would rather not. Honestly, I don't mind teaching online, and I love teaching in person. And I like teaching online too. Doing both at the same time requires such a higher skill set level.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely it's definitely, I think, the most challenging, because you're constantly juggling back and forth. Yep. And it's switching on a part of your brain that's like, oh, I'm here in person. Oh, I'm here over there. Yeah. There are tips and tricks that can help, there are that I teach people to do. But I think it's really wonderful. The thing that I love about it is it's grown my community. I started teaching only online during COVID, and then I started teaching both when I started teaching both. And I have to say that I have more online students than I have in-person students. And my online students are the most consistent. And I've been teaching for how many years? My online students practice almost every single day for the last,
Wow.
what is it, almost 4 years? Every
Yeah.
day, including my
Wow.
80-year-old mother who practices every single. I know.
Mom, we love it. I mean, I do think like this conversation we have about online is like inferior to in person. Like we have to just start saying that's bullshit.
I
It's
agree.
bullshit. It's not. And because what people I think in their brains are doing is comparing like, and we can talk teacher trainings because this has been brought up a lot in this series. There are online only, asynchronous only, $300 yoga teacher training programs
Yep.
online.
Yep.
And that's what people are comparing to an in-person yoga class. And I'm like, but see, that's not everybody that's teaching online. That they're
That's
just
right.
putting on a video or a course or something like that somebody's going to do in their own pace.
Yeah.
Like that's not what you're talking about.
No, that's not what I'm doing. And listen, there's a value for that too, right? Like I feel like there's a value for everything. It's, if a person is, if that's what a person can do for a teacher training, invest that amount of money for a teacher training, that may be that training that's the only one that's available for whatever reason. And, when you're teaching online, there's a big difference between just watching a video that you're doing at home and having a live experience online. And what I've discovered, believe it or not, is that I've gotten to be a much better teacher since teaching live online. I see much more, because I've had to train my eye to see in a whole new way. And I've also learned how to feel, actually, because one of the skills that I think is so exciting when you're teaching yoga is not just looking, but it's actually feeling in your body. You're feeling signals and signs. Very often when I'm making a decision, when I'm teaching, it's like I just have a hit, I have a feeling. I'm picking up what another person is doing. It's a kinesthetic transmission. And you can actually learn how to do that on Zoom.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's like, I'm so grateful for this because I feel like I've grown so much. And the other wonderful thing for many students about the online world is they feel freer and safer, many people, in their own home.
Yes.
They don't feel like they're being judged or compared. They don't have to get there. There's accessibility issues. They don't have to travel. And they can be more consistent. So, I mean, I'm like, I never in a million years thought I would think this way at all, but I've completely changed my tune about it. And I love that I feel like it's brought people together that wouldn't normally be together.
I agree with you. I have one person that's training with me now that has said, because part of the model I have in the 200 is that you will absolutely learn how to teach online, and you will learn, like, because it's a different skill set, you're using anchoring in a different way online than you are in person, like all those kind of things. And this person had said to me, oh, well, if there's one thing I'm definitely not doing, it's teaching online. And I said, it will get you better faster. And he just looked at me and he was like, really? And I'm like, yep. You'll get better, fast. You'll better and sharper faster. If you want to up level a skill set faster, get your ass online. Like,
so true. You're so right. Yeah. That's good. Absolutely.
Leslie, will you tell everybody where to find you? Because I'm like going to follow you around like a puppy dog now. I love it. I love it.
Well, my website is goodgroundyoga.com. And my Instagram is the same, at goodgroundyoga.com. And on Facebook, it's best to actually follow me personally. I just use Leslie Pearlman on Facebook. I do have a Good Ground Yoga page as well, but that's where I'm at. So, I'd love for people to come and check out. I have so many wonderful free offers also on my website for yoga teachers and yoga studio owners and practitioners. I have a entire page of resources for yoga teachers to just get started. I think it's really important.
Thank you for having this conversation. It's been so good.
Yeah, I loved it. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me, Leslie. I am now completely a fangirl of yours. And here, my friends, are our key takeaways. First, How many times in this series can I say this? But yoga studios train a lot of the time because they need teachers who work and teach like they do at the studio, who understand their point of view on yoga. It isn't necessarily because they need the money, my friends. I promise. Next, being a great yoga teacher does not mean you are a great teacher trainer. Leading people through trainings is a skill set that is different than being a person who is amazing at leading a class. Next, transferable skills from training to be a yoga teacher to doing other things in life are something that we don't often talk about. But really, the things you learn from teaching yoga are transferable skills that you can take out into your real life. You will be a better communicator from teaching yoga, and that can happen in all aspects of your life. Next, who are you being as a yoga teacher and a space holder? This is such a good question. How do you show up when you're teaching yoga? Leslie identifies this as a crucial question, and I think she's correct. We need to be intentional about who we are as teachers and who we are in life as well. Next, the phrase, listen to your body. Oh my gosh, you guys, I have such a hang up on this. This is a setup for failure without also teaching the accompanying skills of learning how to do that in your body in a yoga class. Next, mentorship matters. Leslie talks about an ascension model in her studio. Essentially, what are your people going to do next? And I think mentoring skillfully needs to be a part of the future of our industry. Do you need a mentor? Could you be a mentor? I want to talk a lot more about this in the podcast in 2025, so stay tuned. We are going to get into it. And finally, I also don't know how many times I can say this, but I love that Leslie and I had this conversation. Hybrid teaching is the way of our future. What skill sets do you need to improve upon in order to be more comfortable with this way of teaching? Okay, thank you so much for this conversation, Leslie. I'm not even kidding when I say that I took notes for myself when I listened back again to edit this podcast. Next week, I'm sharing a really special conversation with my friend Shannon Crow. If you've been following the podcast for a while, you know that Shannon and I are personal friends. We know each other from real life, and she and I have chosen to share a conversation that we had together as friends with you all. I think this conversation is so important. She and I are both passionate about change making in the world, and sometimes I think we forget, as change makers, to lean into our friendships first, even if that means having a hard conversation. So Shannon and I have a hard conversation on the air together. We talk about what it means to be space holders for difficult and change making conversations, and I have to say, I just love this chat that we share, and I think you will too. Until then, we better get back to work, friends. I will catch you around the water cooler next time.